Welcome to the Drill Down, in-depth answers to oilfield questions. I'm John Spears.
And I'm Richard Spears. And did you see what Ryan Reynolds announced a couple weeks ago?
I cannot imagine. What?
Other than buying the Welsh soccer team?
No, I'm missing. All my Ryan Reynolds feud went down on me last week. So what's the news, guys?
He and his buddy who bought the Welsh soccer team did a 5-minute video about them each getting colonoscopies at the age of 45.
We draw the line.
You want to know what their results were? It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is our public service announcement.
Okay, I get
because, gentlemen, if you're watching or listening or tuning in or reading about this, if you're 45 or above, get a colonoscopy.
Just like Ryan Reynolds. Yeah,
that's right.
He's 45.
He's 45.
Wow.
He doesn't look 45.
Good for him. So we have a topic today, which I think is kind of interesting, and it flows from something we talked about a couple of weeks ago now, which was, are oil prices still important, right? And so we've discussed that and concluded that they're not as important as they used to be, because operators settle on the notion first, well, how much do I want to grow production? And then activity kind of flows from that decision more so than what's the price of oil. But that then raises the question, if we know that oil companies are very capital disciplined these days. We also know that, at least here in North America, they're not doing much exploration, right? So the bigger guys, operators tend to have acquired land. They've put blocks together, and now they're working on drilling through that inventory of prospects that they have, right? Not too much in terms of adding to the prospects. And so under that circumstance, the question is, are they drilling themselves out of business? Can you imagine, maybe toward the end of a decade, so it's not tomorrow, but is there a time when, under those set of circumstances, pursuing profitability goals, restricting cash flow to developing and completing existing prospects and so forth, not adding to the inventory and so forth, are they drilling themselves out of business?
Yeah, and it all stems from a conversation I had at breakfast, gosh, early in August maybe, with a guy who had been a senior big E&P company. And he said, I think in 8 years they're done. And we put a number out there knowing that there's 8 years. We don't fall off a cliff in 8 years. But his point and this idea that we've adopted is, if you don't explore, if you don't do anything to modify the boundaries of this area that you are developing, you do eventually kind of run out of space to work in.
The land area of North America is a finite number, largely speaking.
It is, so, and it's not like farming where you've got the same 40 acres or the same 5,000 acres, and every year you can plant a new crop. You've got to define space. So it's an absolutely right. So it's an interesting situation we find ourselves in, right? Because again, why do we have all these shale fields and tight oil fields to go off and explore today, right? It's not so much that they were doing a lot of exploration to find them, right? We've drilled millions of wells here in the U.S. We drilled through these shales,
and the conclusion was, don't stop, keep drilling. Because it's not worth producing. You can't get it out of the ground economically. Right?
There be monsters there. Get through as quick as you can.
Again, these are porous formations, but they're not permeable. And so until we learn,
I'm going to say they're not even porous, but they're definitely not permeable.
Right. So until we learned how to turn the corner, drill horizontally for a very long distance, and then frack it, it just wasn't made economic sense. But in the course of going after the targets that they were shooting for, right, the conventional fields, the aerial extent of many of these shales was largely determined in that fashion, right? So, so operators ended up with, at the end, when technology improved, then a resource that they had ignored became viable, right? And so we're working through drilling those fields, exploiting those reserves, right? So the question is, when she get finished, like what's left after that, right? So to your point, like what would you be drilling for once shales are done? And so you think about many operators who have several tens of thousands of acres in inventory, you know, that's what they're working on. But once they're done with that, where do they go next? So, of course, the pressure pumping guys are jumping up and down at this point going, refrac, refrac, right?
Yeah. They're shouting at
we understand.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Stand down, soldier.
But that does, you know, sort of say, well, maybe not refrac, but perhaps is there something that technology improvement might hold that would open up yet another area that we've, as an industry, ignored?
Well, I'm going to ask you a history question.
Okay.
Do you remember back in the 80s, the CIA had an estimate of Russian oil output?
Yes.
And they made a mistake in their estimation of future oil output because they left out one serious component.
Right, which was the whole technology improvement piece. Yeah, they had Russian production falling off a cliff or something, you know, coming down over the course of the 80s. And in fact, what happened was the Russians were able to improve their technology, extend their production, and actually lift output, as I recall.
It's a lesson to all of us to say, if you forget or neglect the fact that technology always advances, then you're gonna reach some forecasted assumption that I guarantee is going to be wrong, because technology does advance.
You know, it's interesting when you think about the business model of oil companies, right? And you say, okay, what are the facts on the ground? Well, it's a commodity. So oil and gas are commodities. Molecules look the same pretty much around the world. So they're not as a commodity, you don't have any control over the price, right? It's going to be a function of, you can't add a feature to it to make it change until you get into the refining side of the business, right? So as an upstream producer, your product is a commodity. You're subject to all the price variations that a commodity might throw at you.
The best you can do is play in the futures market and agree today to a price in the future.
Right, you can hedge that risk.
But I guarantee that that price I'm agreeing to in the future is lower.
Yeah, right. Almost always. Yeah. So pricing, you know, control over pricing is limited. Your oil and gas is a diminishing or wasting resource, right? You produce from it. Unlike that acre of farmland, you know, a field depletes, and so there's this constant need to replace that. Now, you know, you can drill more wells in a field, squeeze more oil out of it that way for a while. But the point is that it's a capital intensive business that you need to continually restore. And in the past anyway, the industry, you know, the valuation of companies reflected the fact that, well, it was a cash sop for years and years. You spent more than you ever sort of cleared from a cash flow basis, and so the value of the company was really wrapped up in the terminal value of your field, as your business.
Right. I'm not so much buying a share based upon today's revenue and profitability. I've got this asset base that I'm buying the whole thing for later.
Right, exactly. So when I think price is going to rise, I want to buy now because I think 10 years from now, 5 years from now, it's going to be, you know, oil's going to be double the price and the share of stock's going to be higher. So now the model is different, isn't it? Because now you're saying, well, these things are these oil companies are being structured to throw off a lot of cash. And
I'm harvesting.
Right, because in the old model, I was absorbing a lot of cash, but I was growing my output. And so, you know, the volume numbers are going to be higher. Now the model is I'm throwing off a lot of cash. I'm not sure that my volume numbers are going to be higher 10 years from now than they are today, right? I may be drilling so I can sustain production at what I am, but long term, again, given the constraints on where the acreage is and how much acreage and everything, it suggests that the production profile begins to roll over. Yeah.
And it rolls over not in the long term, but in the not too distant future term.
Well, yes, that's a feature of the fact that you got to frack these wells and they have, you know, 60-80% decline curves year one and that kind of thing, right? So that I think is, and so my takeaway from, you know, thinking through this is that the approach that we have as an industry now, in terms of focus on profitability and the like, we can't ride this off into the sunset forever. It's going to change, if nothing else, because the industry may end up looking like the industry did back in the 50s and 60s when U.S. production declined. Remember, it wasn't that long ago, 10 years ago, U.S. oil output, lower 48, 3.5 million barrels a day, right?
Oh, that's right.
How did we get there, right?
We didn't know we could drill an oil well until about 2010.
Yeah.
12 years ago, right?
A lost start, yeah. So that, I think, is sort of the path that we're on. Now, technology change, discovering new ways to get to deeper fields, something like that, could reroute us. And so, but the path that we're on now ends up, I think, sort of heading us off into that direction. So we may see 2 or 3 more years where oil production lower 48 continues to grow, but then beyond that point, the image gets pretty fuzzy, I think. So,
if based upon last week's podcast, where we talked largely about the burgeoning oilfield service sector in the Middle East, if you will,
yes,
and about the creation of and the growth of companies in the Middle East to be the Halliburtons and Schlumbergers of the Middle East, that's where growth could happen, but those are completely different types of reservoirs. Yeah. But no doubt they require additional services in order to just maintain their output, kind of like what we have here in the United States and in Canada. So growth may not be an option for the oil industry with regard to output.
Yes,
of
right.
Of oil.
Yeah, the gas side's a little bit different, but you're right. There's some real challenges ahead of us, given the pressures on global oil demand as a result of the climate change discussions, and then just the pattern that operators are working under today, and the business models that they're creating today. So if you were, you've got a few dollars here and there to put to back or buy into the shares of a company, would you put much money into an exploration-related company? That's the ultimate contrarian play at this point, isn't it?
Well, it is. It is.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, onshore U.S. or North American focus would be tougher bit to justify. I think there might be places out there where it's called for yet, but it's a challenge. I mean, I love the sector, and there will be people who grow rich from it, because this isn't gonna. When the world's consuming 100 million barrels of oil a day, there's going to be a long period of time where oil will remain viable and whatnot. But
from an oilfield services point of view, I find it very easy to find those drilling related companies that on the services side that are easy to invest in. Same with the completion side, and same with the production side, because it does not get any easier to get oil and gas out of the ground. So you got to spend more money on lift-like technologies. It is less clear to me. It's foggier. It's foggier. There's more dust on the battlefield, more smoke on the battlefield, with regard to the exploration side of technologies.
Yeah, and of course, we've been talking about couching this discussion in the context of the industry as a whole. Individual companies have the option of saying, "Well, I'm going to replenish my inventory of undrilled prospects by buying you." And adding that. It doesn't do anything to the total.
No, net doesn't change.
Yeah. So, but that does suggest then that, again, in a situation where production growth is flattening out or rolling over, that consolidation on the production side just happens as a natural course of business, because you're now acquiring outfits that still have prospects that have not yet been drilled and completed. So.
If you were to, if I were to give a single word to what drives M&A on both the producer side and the service and equipment side, it would be consolidation. And that period of time is the next 3 to 5 years. Consolidate on the E&P side, consolidate on the service side, and that defines the sector.
You usually think about consolidation in terms of removing redundant capacity, right? And so you think about that. Well, it's not like again, a lot of times you see consolidation at the low part of the cycle, right? Where there's spare everything in all directions, right? And so redundant capacity is the name of the game, and that's why you consolidate. But we're at a point now where, at least North America, a lot of the utilization numbers for rigs and so forth are at a pretty high level,
pretty
right?
High.
So the consolidation, I agree with you, goes forward, but it's all about efficiency now, right?
Scale and efficiency.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Anyway, thanks so much for listening to us today. This has been the Drill Down Show, and I'm John Spears.
I'm Richard Spears.